Welcome to Target Market Insights, the multifamily and marketing podcast. Each week, John Kasman interviews multifamily and marketing experts to teach you how to find the best places to invest, attract investors, and grow your portfolio. You are listening to Target Market Insights with your host, John Kasman.
Welcome to Target Market Insights, the multifamily and marketing show. I'm your host, John Kasman, and I want to thank you for joining us for another great episode. Now, do me a quick favor. If you like this show, if you're getting good value, make sure you hit the subscribe button so you don't miss an episode, and let us know. Give us that rating and review so more people can find this show and learn more about the great insights that we're unpacking here today. Now, today's guest is Mr. Lee Yoder. Lee is the founder behind Threefold Real Estate Investing, and he's committed to forging a path that will generate incredible wealth and opportunity for all involved. His focus has driven the business forward by forging new relationships with top-notch professionals in the real estate world and bringing on more partners to invest alongside Threefold. Lee also hosts an exciting new podcast, Threefold Real Estate Investing, which focuses on multifamily real estate investing, while also focusing on pursuing better relationships with family and a better walk with Christ. Let's welcome to the show, Lee Yoder.
Yeah, hey, John. Thanks for having me. Pleasure to be here.
Lee. Absolutely, man. It's great talking to you today. I went over your bio at a very high level. Why don't you take a minute and give us a little bit more context on your background?
Yeah, well, John, I'll just kind of tell you a little bit about how I got started into real estate. I started out as a physical therapist. Actually still am a physical therapist, but I was, working in an outpatient clinic. Had some hours that didn't line up great with my wife and I starting a young family. So jumped into home health physical therapy, where I got to make my own schedule. So it was very flexible. Actually had a lot of time at home, so it was great for my wife and our family. But I was really bored. Wasn't challenged at all. Wasn't fulfilled in that. So the company I was with actually had a kind of offered me to come into the office more on the corporate side and start building the division. So I started doing that and actually stopped doing physical therapy altogether. Now I'm more on the business side, director of operations type stuff, building this division inside of a startup company. And so now with work, I'm very much fulfilled, very challenged. It's very exciting, a lot of fun for me. But now, it also took a lot of time, took a lot of energy. Didn't have as much time and energy for my family. So now for my wife and my young family, it's not so good. So kind of saw both sides. So a friend of mine actually introduced me to real estate, just investing in general. Read Rich Dad, Poor Dad, kind of went down that rabbit hole and started to formulate a plan of, okay, what if I left the corporate side and I go back to home health physical therapy, where I know I'm going to be not challenged, not fulfilled, but I start getting into real estate, as a side hustle, and it's that, that entrepreneur in me, that wanting to build something, wanting to be challenged. So that's what I did. About 4 years ago, I left the corporate space, took a huge, big pay cut to go back to home health physical therapy and do that. But then I started real estate. It was about a year before I got my first just single family home that we flipped. After that, went to a duplex, and then just about a year ago, got into the multifamily side and have really been focused on that ever since.
Yeah, so you started off in physical therapy, basically went from doing that, you wanted more flexibility, so you went to the home health side, got bored doing that, went the corporate side, enjoyed it, but you needed more flexibility again. So went back to home health and started investing in real estate. When you decided to start investing in real estate, you talked about taking a big pay cut, and it sounds like you were enjoying the work, as far as the corporate stuff, but, maybe there's a little bit of stress or strain from a family standpoint as far as your time goes. As you went home to do the home health and then also with real estate, I mean, it on the surface, it would appear that, hey, maybe you're not really solving a problem because you're just exchanging the same work that would have been in the corporate job for work flipping houses and doing the single family stuff. So, I mean, what was that experience like? Was it around the same amount of time, or did you have this vision to say, hey, this is going to actually create more time for me and my family?
Yeah. Well, it's a great point, John. So my thought was, I'll still work a lot. I mean, I very much like to work. I mean, that can be a problem sometimes. I really do like to work. But my thought was, with the real estate stuff, I'm kind of working for myself, right? So the home health stuff, I know, even most of the time, I'm not even working 40 hours a week there. So I can do this real estate stuff, but I can do it early in the morning. I mean, I usually wake up at 4:30 in the morning. So getting stuff done. So I started that with my corporate job because I thought, how can I put in more hours, but not take away from my family? And my answer to that problem is just get up really, really early. So I started doing that then, but I thought, and I kind of like it. So I still do that today. But with the real estate stuff, I was like, okay, I can do stuff early in the morning, late night. So my thought was I can control it. But you make a great point because actually getting into that first house flip, it was like that for a while. And then it kind of got down to crunch time. And it was like, my wife sat me down and was like, hey, you say you want to have this ready to sell by May 1st because that's the best time to sell a flip, right? Look how much we have left to do. Like you need to be out there like every weekend. And that's what we end up doing. So absolutely. For like 3 months, it was, it was almost worse than being back in the corporate space. So that, kind of taught me something about flipping houses that, you can, I was working for myself, but suddenly myself as a boss was like, you got to get out here. You got to be out here I was out there every day on top of, my full-time job and then on the weekends, stuff like that. So it became very consuming. So that helped me decide, flipping might not be where it's at because there's going to come a time where like you really have to hit it hard. And if things don't go well, you got to be out there even more. So that's why I kind of moved away from that, moved into multifamily. And I'll say, as far as that goes, John, it really, there's been some times you get busy. If you put in an offer, you got to get really serious about doing some underwriting really quickly. So you might have a week or two where you do, it's almost like you're back in the corporate space. But beyond that, I will say I have been successful. My wife would attest to that as well, where I've been able to fit in the real estate, when I have time. And there's some busy weeks, but I'm nowhere close to where I was within the corporate space.
No, that makes a lot of sense, right? And that's one thing I think is really important is, and what I've gathered so far is that you were really clear on what you wanted, right? And it sounds like time with your family was one of the really big important
Absolutely.
factors for you is understanding I want to be driven, I want to be challenged, but I want to make sure I have this time with my family, especially a young family, to
Yep.
be there for those key moments and be present, and making sure you're taking on jobs. And the good thing about working for yourself is you can work hard, but you can identify what times those are, right?
Uh-huh.
So if you're willing to wake up
Yep.
at 4:30 in the morning and grind for a couple of hours before you get into more of the day job or have daddy duties or whatever the case may
Mm-hmm.
be, you got a few hours to work. So if you're willing to sacrifice, you can now create your own hours and be flexible, but you control kind of your own destiny. So that's great to hear. I want to get into multifamily, but first I want to talk a little bit more about where you're at and market and some of those things,
Yep.
right? So I know you're in Ohio. Talk a little bit about kind of where you were doing the flip projects, and then we'll start to transition into the portfolio you've built with your multifamily.
Sure. So I'm basically between Cincinnati and Dayton. I'm in a town called Lebanon. And so the flips I've done are all in Lebanon. I've got them all at the auction, mostly the county auction. And then my multifamily stuff is not in Lebanon. Lebanon's a pretty good market, so I can't find good deals here. But I've kind of been pushed out to the edge. So my three multifamily properties that I own now are all, 20 minutes or so outside of Dayton, kind of in a couple of them are in between Cincinnati and Dayton.
All right. So Cincinnati, obviously, a secondary market, but pretty large and pretty well known secondary market. Dayton's pretty well known,
Mm-hmm.
and you're playing kind of in between those areas, or kind of in the outskirts of that. And
Yes.
for listeners who are not in Cincinnati or Dayton, I think that we're always looking to figure out where can we find deals that pencil, and sometimes that major metro just doesn't have it because there's so much demand. So you start to look a little further out, a little
Yep.
further out, a little further out, and
Mm-hmm.
as you went through that process and, living in Lebanon, you probably already are there to an extent. But as you went through that process, how did you start to adjust your underwriting, your projections, your criteria to account for the fact that you were now moving a little further away from kind of that core MSA location?
Yeah, sure. It's a great point, John. And I really did have to do that. For me, it's like, if you're buying in Cincinnati, Cincinnati is a good example, but most cities, there's some diversity of employers. There's a lot of employers, and you can say, man, even if like this one went out, they can go over here, and you just think like, where are my residents going to work? And when you're in Cincinnati, the options are limitless, right? You go out into a small town, and that town might just have a few. There's a school, maybe there's a hospital close, maybe there's a few factories. But what I was always looking at, John, was like, but could they drive to Dayton? If worse comes to worse, and maybe I have to lower rent, And I think that's what I was always taking into consideration is I'm probably going to have to try to be more competitive at times if times get tough, and I'm going to have to be more competitive on rent. Like, hey, I know you want to live within 10 minutes of your job there in Cincinnati, but if you're willing to drive a half an hour, I've got a nice place to live, but I'll charge less. So I think you have to be ready to compete in that way where you're a little bit farther out. If the people that are going to live in your building are still going to work in Dayton or still going to work in Cincinnati, it's going to be a longer drive. But and we'll get into this later, but I think maybe some things are coming where we're going to have a little bit more of an advantage because not so many people are driving downtown to work, right? So maybe some of that comes around and it's a good spot to be. But that's how I look at it. Is yes, it's in a little bit further out. So sure, I would love to own in Cincinnati, but I have a lot less competition, so I can buy at a much better price further out. And just knowing I may have to lower rent a little bit compared to those guys in Cincinnati because I'm just going to have to compete by saying, yeah, you're going to have to drive further. Yeah, there's not as many restaurants. You're a little further from some of the things, but I'll provide you a nice place to live at a better rate.
Yeah, so what I'm hearing you say is, still providing a quality housing unit first and foremost, right? It's
Mm-hmm.
still something that you have to do, and it may need to be a little bit better quality, because they are living a little further out, and they get that value, right? So the price point
Yeah.
certainly comes into play. But you talked about the drive into core employment, and asking yourself the question, where will my residents work? And I think that's a really key thing, especially the further out, the more remote you go. You have to be really clear on where will they work? If there's a large factory, for instance, that's an hour away from the major city, that may be a big source of employment, but what happens if that factory closes or even just
Yep.
cuts 20% of its staff, right? So you kind of have to monitor those things and pay attention. And one great tip, if you are going to a place, I mean, we always talk about job diversification and employment diversification and all those things, but certainly there are people who thrive in some of these smaller markets. And one of the things you want to do if you are going to a smaller market like that where there is a larger employer in town, you better pay close attention to that employer. So, are they growing? Are they expanding right now? I would look up their quarterly reports. I would set up a Google alert for them, and I would really pay
Mhm.
attention to what's happening with them because if there's signs that their business is contracting, that may give you some pause. But if they're expanding and they're looking to add on another wing or something like that, then that's probably a good sign that there's development. I would also say too, and maybe you've seen some of this, looking at the overall economic development plan for the region, because sometimes that's more county based than the actual neighborhood or town. But
Sure.
sometimes there's economic development where they've identified a plot of land where they're like, hey, this region, we want to put in an industrial park and get as
Mhm.
many larger companies to come and build this space out as we can. So certainly different factors to look at if you are going to play in kind of small markets, especially in more of a kind of a tertiary part of a larger city. We
Yeah.
started talking about some of the areas where you're at. Maybe you can just talk about the names and compare them a little bit. So I know Lebanon we've talked about a little bit, but where else are you investing today?
So yeah, like I said, so far mostly it's been outside of Dayton. I mentioned one's in this tiny little town called Spring Valley. That's near Xenia. Xenia is on the east side of Dayton, and it's a step outside of Dayton. So one of the towns right close to that is Beaver Creek, Ohio, and that area is seeing a lot of growth. So that's on the east side of Dayton. Dayton kind of gets a bad rap, and there are some rough areas of Dayton. But really, if you're in south, like if you're almost like south of Dayton, there's a lot of good areas there. Centerville, Springboro, Kettering. Those are all good at Beaver Creek. That's kind of on the southeast. So those areas are all really good. And Beaver Creek's seeing some expansion out into Xenia. So one of the projects we're looking at now is in Xenia, and that's we're excited about maybe some growth continuing out that way. The other one, the one I have that's been the biggest problem for me is the one in Franklin, which is south of Dayton, just down 75, again, between Dayton and Cincinnati, but definitely closer to Dayton. The next town down is Middletown, a little bit closer to Cincinnati. And those areas aren't doing very well. There's not growth in those areas. Those are lower socioeconomic areas, tougher areas. So we probably over improve the property a little bit there. So, the goal was always we did want to be on the high end of rent because we wanted the high end residents. So we wanted to have the nicest units in the area and get the best residents. But I do feel like we've priced ourselves out a little bit too much. I mean, we've moved some people in and they're great residents. So I'm happy with those, but it just seems like a lot of people that would like to live at our can't afford that. And we've come down on rent to match that a little bit. One to some of your points, John, I feel like one of our properties is out in Wilmington. And I think it really highlights what you've talked about so far, because Wilmington, for people around this area, will remember that DHL had built an airport out in Wilmington. Or maybe it was already built, but they used it. But Wilmington blew up. And I don't know, maybe you know better than me, but it's been at least 10 years, maybe 15 by now, that DHL left. And they're now down at CDG Airport, and they use that one. But they just left. I mean, so there was an employer, with thousands of employees. And for a smaller town like Wilmington, and to my point where I was talking about, like, how far are you outside of a big city where people could go work? Wilmington's like a half an hour from Dayton. So maybe a little bit more. So you're a ways out. So not many people are going to stay in Wilmington when their employer leaves and now they have to drive to Dayton or something like that, or to Cincinnati. They're going to move. So Wilmington saw a huge decrease. Now Amazon has really moved in, and a couple others as well. And so now it's better diversified because that airport is being used, but now it's by several different employers. So I feel better about Wilmington as diversified. But Amazon's kind of a big one. And John, because I know you've talked about the area, but Amazon's building a huge thing down in Florence, Kentucky, close to CVG. So I wonder if some of that moves out of Wilmington down there, because they're just leasing space at the airport in Wilmington for right now. So Wilmington is a great example of some of the things you've talked about, where you got to be careful. I mean, people that were there 15 years ago when DHL was there probably thought their properties, and they were, I'm sure, property values were skyrocketing. And then they leave, and it was devastating for that town. Devastating. So it's been a long climb back. And I think they're better diversified now, but that you really got to worry about something like that in a town that's out there.
Oh, great points. And I appreciate you bringing some real world examples to those companies that have come in and left. And we've certainly seen that. And, they call this area the Rust Belt for a reason. And I think part of that notion is obviously companies leaving. So us in the Midwest, we are certainly familiar with that dynamic and trying to be careful on where we invest. And certainly there's aspects that you have to pay attention to. So if you keep that in mind, again, there's opportunities out there. You just have to really understand, what's going on and kind of hedge your bets. And to your point, if people are living out there, there has to be more than just employment. Employment's big, and that's certainly a great way to get out there, but you need to have other amenities. It needs to be great parks, or great schools, or still some kind of nightlife, restaurants, or something else that's going to make someone want to stay and not sell their house and get 30 minutes closer. And we're starting to see maybe a little bit of that dynamic shift with a move back to the suburbs for a lot of people right now, especially coming out of COVID, where people are saying, hey, you know what, I don't necessarily want to live in a highly dense area. I'd rather spread out, have my space, get me an acre or so, and have some yard space. So we are seeing that dynamic shift a little bit. So maybe that will come back into play. You started to build your multifamily portfolio. You talked about, Wilmington and some of the other areas that you've invested in right now. What was that transition like for you, going from doing some single family flip projects to smaller mid-sized multifamily rentals? What was that transition like? And tell me, what was like the biggest hurdle to overcome in making that transition?
Yeah, it definitely was a transition. It was pretty scary. I'd say that the thing I had going for me is I joined the Cincinnati REIA, the Real Estate Investment Association in Cincinnati, and they had a focus group called the Apartment Syndication Focus Group, led by Mark Hutton. And man, he does a great job. He's a great mentor, very generous with his time, and he really helped me a lot. So, where I started was just underwriting deals, because what's so different about it, John, is like you're really buying a business, right? You're buying a business that has income, that has expenses, and the value of the property, it's completely different. You're valued based on your net operating income. So how much money you're bringing in minus your expenses, there's your profit. And then, you times that by capitalization rate, and there's your value. So that was very different. It's very, all the stuff we talked about, like, hey, where are my residents going to work? I mean, single family, you just kind of look at what are houses going for? I mean, if housing prices are going up and how long are they on the market? Well, then my house is going to sell, right? Because obviously people are buying in this market. if houses are sitting on the market and the prices aren't really going up, okay, people aren't buying in this area. It's not a good area to flip. So it's completely different when you're valuing the property and just deciding, is this a good property to buy? Like maybe it's a good deal, but maybe it's a good deal because nobody else wants it, because this is not a good area, because people don't want to live here. And you're not just looking at, does one person want to live here? For a 16 unit, do 16 people want to live in this area? Or is it going to be difficult? A couple people move out. How long is it going to take to fill these units? So many questions. So it felt like so many things to think about compared to a single family home. So having Mark and some of the other people in the group, um, we would look at deals together, look at areas together. He gave me a lot. Listening to podcasts like yours, John, is absolutely essential. The stuff you guys talk about, you bring on great guests, and your stuff, John, and you're talking about, well, I mean, even some of the stuff you've said already, like, employers. I mean, I didn't know to think about that, but luckily I'm listening to podcasts like yours. And so you say that while I'm looking at a deal, oh, okay, I better go check the employment in this area, and is there diversification? And like you said, set up alerts, and the biggest employer in the area. So I was doing things like that to really familiarize myself with what's important when you're looking at a multifamily property instead of just a single family home. So there was a lot to think about, having mentors, in person in the meetups I'm going to, but then having virtual mentors like you, and some of the other podcasts I listened to really helped. And then it's really just digging into it and leaning into it. And I think you got to get over sometimes you might listen to somebody like you, John, and go, okay, well, John's telling me what to do, but I don't know how to do it as well as John, so I can't do it. And you kind of have to get over that. And I'll tell you, another one of the biggest things that helped me, John, was I've never wanted to manage my properties. And I would highly suggest people that are wanting to make the jump into multifamily that, I don't know, there'll be guys that disagree with me, but I felt very good about the fact that I wasn't going to manage it, because I brought in a property manager before I bought the property. So I'm talking to them. This is the one I use in Dayton, Vic Green Realty. They're awesome. They manage 800 units, okay, just in Dayton, just in the greater Dayton area. So when I bring them in and say, here's a property I'm looking at, do you think you're going to get it rented? I mean, I'm going to trust their opinion way, I don't care how much research I do. I'm going to trust their opinion. So if they say, yeah, that's a good rental market, I think we can get that rented, and here's the rent I think we can get. Well, those are the numbers I'm now going to plug into my underwriting, and I'm going to feel much better about that. So that was huge for me. And I wouldn't do it any other way other than bringing in a property management company to partner with.
Yeah, listen, I just think you gave some great insights for everyone listening to this, because if you are looking to make that transition, part of it is educating yourself, and I always talk about there's 3 C's to attract capital, but there's 3 C's to invest in multifamily and be successful, right? One is confidence. The second one is credibility. The third is connections. But on the confidence piece, you have to educate yourself. You have to take
Right.
the time to underwrite deals, to have a mentor, to have other people in your network who can give you feedback and say, hey, yep, you did a great job here, or hey, you missed this thing, or did you double check this? And getting that feedback, you're just going to get better and better. So you have to go through that process. You talked about also like not being able to do something as well as someone else. You're not in competition with other people. You're in competition with yourself. So you
Right.
shouldn't be listening to, me or anyone else and hear us talk and saying, oh, but I can't do it as well as he can. That's not your goal. Your goal is to do it as well as you can and just to continue to get better at it, right? And that's why it helps to have people in your corner who can advise you and give you feedback, which leads me to your third point, which was having that third party management company. When we talk about credibility, I think a lot of people get hung up trying to get into multifamily because they're trying to do it by themselves. And even though you didn't have a lot of partners, what you did was you hired a property management company that had the experience, they have the market knowledge, and you can really rely on them and their expertise to help guide you along the process. So as you're underwriting deals and looking at what your rents could be, you're going to talk to them. They're going to give you feedback and say, hey, we've got rent units similar to this, or hey, you would need to add this to the unit, not that. People aren't really looking for that right now, but they can give you the direction you need to make sound decisions to oversee your investment. So whatever you're doing, especially if you're new and starting out, you really want to focus on building a team around you and a network that can support you so you can move forward. And I just think that's absolutely critical, especially if you're not taking on a bunch of partners. If you're trying to do it as
Yeah.
kind of the main person yourself, then you're going to need some mentors and some property managers and some other people in your corner that can support you and make sure you're making the right decisions along the way.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So as you transition, right? You bought, and I know that you got a few properties now. So, what was the first property, and then maybe you can walk me through how you started to build from that first property to the total number of units you're at today.
Sure. The first property was a 16 unit, just southeast of Dayton. It was an old school building, so kind of a weird property. It was turned into a nursing home and then turned into apartments. So yeah, a weird property, and it's in the middle of a cornfield, like a lot of schools are in this area anyway. In Ohio. So kind of a weird property, and the owners had really let it go. So it was online. I mean, people say, LootNet is where deals go to die, and this one went to die on LootNet, and it sat, it was dead for like a year and a half. It had been under contract a couple times, but fell out just because it had issues. So, as a guy trying to get started, I'm like, I think that's probably the property for me. Just felt like if I get, and this is probably the wrong way to think about it. I felt like if I get at a good enough price, I can't mess this one up, because it was almost like if it had like, oh man, I forget what it was, like 11 or 12 of the 16 full, I would break even on it. So I felt like, man, and it already had 13 full, so I'm like, I can't mess this one up. So made a really low offer on that one. Again, the buyers, or the sellers were just ready to sell. It had sat for so long, so they ended up kind of coming down to where we were at. We got in there, did a lot of work on it. Really started turning that around. But you were kind of asking how we scaled it, John. Like the funny thing is, I think you probably heard of, and maybe you talk about it too, but some other guys talk about the law of the first deal. Like once you get your first deal, it's almost sometimes hard to not get the second deal. Some guys will say, like things kind of start snowballing. And I think I'm a great example of that, because the day we were closing on our first deal, we wrote an offer on our second deal. So, and it just happened that way. Something came up, but what it is when you get that, I mean, it was a 70-day process of getting that first deal, from they accepted our offer all the way to closing. And the whole time leading up to that, I mean, it had been a year in the making of me underwriting deals, getting confident. Now I have a property manager. I just got lending. I mean, that's a very difficult thing the first time you're doing it. So all these things that you have to do for the very first time on your first deal, I mean, are 100 times easier doing it the second time. So it was actually a friend of mine who I'd been talking about investing for a long time, and he didn't get on the first deal with me. But as I'm telling him about this first deal and everything that's going on, he starts looking, and he actually found a property. I mean, it'll probably never happen like that again, but he saw a property that a friend, from church had posted. The guy's a realtor, so sometimes realtors will post commercial properties, and maybe they don't know how to value them as well. So, I mean, he sent it to me. I'm like, we need to offer on this property immediately. This is a great deal, and it has been. So we offered on that the day I was closing on the first one, and it was just because I felt so much more confident going through this first deal. Again, I had the property manager ready to go, so it was like, hey, I'll take this deal and I'll just put the property manager on that one, because I was already. I mean, I hadn't got to see them perform, but I got to talk to enough people and were really comfortable with them. Again, the lending, I had gone through all that, so that's how you scale. At least and my scale now, John, is still only 34 units. I have 3 properties, just 34 units. So I don't mean to pretend I'm bigger than I am. It's still very small, but after that first one, I just had enough confidence to say, I feel confident with the underwriting. That second deal, he sent it to me. I underwrote it quickly. I mean, another thing you find out is that when you send in an LOI and put an offer in on a property, you're not married to that deal. You're still going to go through an inspection process. So I knew, hey, we can get out of this if we have to. If there's something really wrong with this deal, I mean, the numbers look great, but if they're really not, then we can get out of it. So just knowing that, you don't even know that before you get into your first deal. But once you've done one, you understand some things like that. So I felt comfortable. Let's just make an offer on this one. It ended up being as good as it sounded. So we ended up closing on that one. And it was only like a month and a half later that we closed on our 10 unit. And again, it was the same thing. Just use the same property management company. Actually it was during the second deal that I found a great mortgage broker that made the lending process so much easier, because now I just tell him what we're doing and he gives me 2 options. You want this loan or this loan? And they've all been good. So now even that part's easier. So you end up building up a team and building up momentum. It just gives you a lot of confidence outside of yourself.
No, that's amazing,
that's what
man.
we've done.
That's amazing. So in roughly 90 days or so, you acquired three multifamily properties, right?
Yeah. From the time we closed on the third, I mean, it took us 2.5 months to close on it, but after that it went along very quickly.
Yeah. And then you mentioned it's always great to pay attention to the wins, right? And closing on the 3 properties, kind of boom, boom, boom. But you said something in between that I want to make sure we highlight as well. You said that it was almost a year or so of prep work
Yes.
from the time you were looking into multifamily, having your conversations with, mentors and being a part of the Cincinnati RIA and doing all these different things, underwriting deals. It was about a year before you got this first deal, the school project. So I think that to me, it's you want to be patient um, in waiting for the results, but you obviously want to continue to take action. So aggressive with your
Yep.
action, patient with the results, and by doing that, you get to the point where you become more and more comfortable pulling the trigger and recognizing that hey, you can mitigate the risk. And even go back to the school project, you said that listen, if I buy this at a good enough number, I really can't mess this up. And sometimes for your first deal, that's what you need. You just need something where it's like, look, I'm not trying to hit a home run. I
Hmm.
just need a bunt. Okay.
Yeah.
I need to get the bat down, bunt. That's all we're doing. My job is to advance the runner, get this deal
Yeah.
done, and
Right.
move on. And I shouldn't use sports analogies like that, but the point being is that you really want to get that law of the first deal, get the attraction going, and
Sure.
start to build. You also talked about your friend finding the deal. Did he partner with you on that deal?
Yes. Yeah, we
Okay.
did. We just went 50-50 on that deal.
Okay.
He had been wanting to get in. So, yeah, we ended up partnering on that one. Yeah, it
And
went very well.
did you have a partner on the first deal or was that the first time you partnered?
No, we had a partner on the first deal too. Actually, it was some family that
Okay.
came in on that one with us. And actually, my mentor, I gave him a piece of the deal. He had helped me so much. I kind of wanted him to stay in it with me, and I felt
Yep.
like he deserved equity, so gave him a piece. He didn't bring any
Yep.
money, but brought all the expertise, and I wouldn't
Yep.
have done it without him. So gave him a piece. So two partners on the first one, and one on the second one, and then two on the third one.
So explain that to me because one of the challenges a lot of people face is, they don't have experience in multifamily and they need help doing deal or they want a partnership on the first deal and raise capital for that. How did you structure the deal? How did you overcome the lack of experience to bring in capital partners for your first multifamily deal?
Yeah, it's definitely a hurdle. I mean, I guess that's why I started out with people that were betting on me, and had trust in me that I'm a really hard worker, that I'm very honest. I have integrity. So I'm going to at least give it everything I've got, and do right by them. And, the type of person that would, make them whole long before I made sure I was whole in the deal. And like you said, I've been studying it for a year. The people close to me knew that. My friend that sent me the deal, I mean, I've been talking to him about this for a year. I mean, they knew I had done a flip. I had bought a duplex. I kind of skipped over that, but I bought a duplex that I totally turned over and had rented out for a little bit and sold for a great profit. My flips were a success financially because I worked really hard at it. So I went to the people that had seen me already have a little bit of success. This was certainly a level up. So I hadn't done an apartment building yet, but they had faith in me as a person and as a hard worker. They had seen the success that I had in real estate thus far, so they were willing to bet on me, maybe not so much the deal and my track record. The fact that I had my mentor with me, I mean, that certainly made the family members that came in the deal. Hey, I've got, Mark, he says this is a good deal. He's coming in on it with me, or he's going to stay with me on it. He has 200 some units at this point. That helped as well. Again, and hey, I've already talked to the property management company. They've signed off on this being a good deal and being able to get it rented. They say it's a good rental market. So some things like that I think help them feel comfortable too.
Yeah, I mean, that just goes back to everything we talked about, right? The confidence, the credibility, the connections, and sharing your journey. The thing that
Mm-hmm.
really jumps out is you were telling people what you were doing before you were thinking about, hey, I've got this deal. Are you interested in investing? When you were doing the flip projects, when you were bought that duplex, your friend that you kept sharing everything that you were learning and just, sharing your excitement, your enthusiasm, that made it easy for someone to believe in you and what you were doing. And a lot of times people don't want to share until they have the proof and the results. But if you can share your journey, then you can attract the people who actually want to see you succeed and be a part of that journey with you. So it makes
Sure.
life a little bit easier. And then the other piece, going back to credibility, having that mentor join you on the deal and also, approve of it, having the property manager look at it, look at the business plan and approve that. That's going to make you credible. So you have to also understand that it's not just about you and your own experience, but the team that you surround yourself with. And if you can present that, that's going to be way better than, someone calling with no experience saying, hey, do you want to invest with me? Versus bringing a unified front. You've got your property manager, you've got your mentor. Hey, we found this deal. We're all going in. Are you interested in joining us? Right. It's like that's a different
Absolutely.
thing. And people want to belong and be a part of something like that. So that's awesome.
Yeah.
Lee,
Yep.
before we transition to our bullseye round, I do want to talk about Threefold. You are now, I think working more and more with investors, as well as you just recently launched your own podcast. What sparked you to launch the podcast, and what do you hope to achieve with Threefold Real Estate?
Well, part of what sparked me to launch the podcast is just following the footsteps of guys like you, John, and Joe Fairless. I got Joe Fairless's book, the book on the best ever book on apartment syndication, and it's just a way to get the word out. You kind of mentioned that a couple times. On that first deal, my in-laws are actually the ones that invested in that with us, and they're very, very conservative people. My wife was pretty shocked that they wanted to invest with us. They kind of almost accidentally invested with a story I won't get into, but on the flip, and we did well, and they kind of saw the power of it just a very little bit there. So they wanted to do it again and did it in a big way on the 16 unit, and they've really gotten to see the power of investing in real estate versus putting your money in a savings account where you're making nothing these days. So that was really cool, and I think that started for my wife and I, the idea of doing a little more syndication, like bringing more people in. So having other people get to enjoy, the fruits that come with real estate investing. So, we wanted to go bigger. We knew we don't have the capital, but we've seen the power of bringing in others that trust us and believe in what we're doing. So we just wanted to do more of that. So, you kind of have to start a platform. Again, following guys like you and Joe, you start a platform, you start a podcast, you start getting the word out. And another thing with the podcast, what I want to do, John, is just explain to people, maybe they want to do it themselves. Maybe they want to do it with us, but maybe they want to do it themselves. And what I try to get across with the stuff I put out there is I did nothing special. I mean, I think anybody listening to this podcast can see that I've done nothing special, nothing extraordinary. At a full-time job, just kind of jumped into a flip and got a mentor and slowly got into my first property that was a dump that nobody else wanted. And we stuck with it. We've turned it around, and now we're a bit off to the races. Still got a long way to go, but I wanted to put that message out there. Other people can do this, but then also just educate people on multifamily real estate investing, because I believe it's a great way for anybody to build wealth. And the final piece of that, I think, what makes Threefold a little bit different, John. Threefold comes from the verse in Ecclesiastes that talks about a threefold cord is not easily broken, and for us, that threefold cord is my wife and I, then we partner with our investors, but then God is always part of that picture as well. And for us, we're following Christ daily, and that doesn't have to be everybody's journey that invests with us. But for us, it means like having a whole life and having success in real estate or whatever you're in, but in this area, specifically multifamily real estate, but not forgetting that, why you want to have that success. So most people that want to be financially successful want it because they want more time with their family, more time to do things with other people they love and do the things they want to do, and kind of on their own schedule and not have to work really hard until they're 65 or 70, but maybe build up enough wealth to ratchet it back a little bit earlier and spend valuable time with their family as they're growing up and not just have time when their family's already gone. So that's a real, that's what I'm hoping to put out there for people, is that if if you're working really hard and you do have some money, if you invest in real estate, it can help build that wealth for you probably quicker than you think. And maybe you can work a little less. Maybe you can spend more time with the family, because I think that's really important. I think sometimes people, I just hate to see people that say, well, I'm going to work really hard now while my kids are young, and they won't remember these times. They may not have memories of it, but man, you mold your kids in the first few years, I think. So I hate to see people miss out on that. They may not remember it, but it's so important. And I hate to see people think they have to work extremely hard. So I think if you can get into multifamily real estate, it's not a cure, it's not a get rich quick scheme, but it really can help build your wealth, I think, quicker than most people think is possible. And I think in a better way than saving in a savings account for sure. But even the stock market, I think that's pretty volatile. I think we're at a big high. I worry about what it's going to do, but I think multifamily real estate is going to be there. So I'm just trying to get the word out, hoping that other people can see the results of that.
All right, now we're going to do our bullseye questions. You ready for this?
I'm ready.
All right. Give me a failure or an apparent failure that sets you up for later success.
So the failure would probably be, I guess the flip. So the flip we did fine financially, but like I said, there at the end, I got consumed by it for 3 months. I was out there either really early in the morning, trying to be out there before the kids even got up, or late at night, and then every weekend. So that's not what I told my wife it was going to be like. So I told her, hey, I'm going to do home health physical therapy, and then I'm just going to do real estate on the side, like whenever we want to, whenever it works for us. And it was like that for a while, and then it wasn't like that at all. So we did well financially, but we did very poorly, for our life. That's not what my wife and I want. And so it was a failure in that way. And the way it set me up is just I realized flipping, I wasn't going to be able to control my time like I wanted to. So the goal was always to get into multifamily real estate. And I think because of that, it pushed me into it a little bit quicker. So I didn't spend as much time messing around there. I got into multifamily quicker, which I'm happy about.
Give me a digital or mobile resource you recommend for your business.
I'm the last person to ask about this. One other podcast was asking me for my best app, and all I could say was the calendar app, because that's new for me. I used to keep a paper calendar. I finally jumped into the 21st century, or maybe that's the 20th century. And now I've got my calendar on my phone instead of on a piece of paper. But I use I'm actually new to social media as well. I think Facebook and LinkedIn are great networking sources. So that's all I've got, John. I'm terrible at that part. I don't have much
No
to offer.
worries. All good. All right. This is paper, so maybe this is a bit more up your speed. But give me the book you've recommended or gifted the most in the last year.
Yeah, one I wanted to mention was The Compound Effect by Darren Hardy. You were talking earlier, John, about how it took me a year from when I really started studying and getting into multifamily until I closed on my first deal. And the compound effect is basically this idea that you can do these little things, like that you and I do, that it takes to get an apartment building, but it seems like you're doing nothing for the longest time, but you're actually building up all this momentum. And when it takes off, it really shoots up. It's this idea of exponential growth, where, and the best picture that he gives in the book is if somebody asks you, I think it's like if somebody asks you if you want $2 million today, or do you want me to give you a penny today and I'll double your money for the next 30 days? It's hard to imagine that doubling a penny to start is going to give you more than $2 million, but it's actually something crazy, like it ends up being $5 million. But after day 20, you're still only like, I don't know, $1,000, maybe, $5,000. So it still feels like you've made so much less progress than the guy that has 2 million. But because now you're doubling 5,000, 10, 20, it just takes off. And I think that's really what multifamily investing takes, is consistent effort for a long time, where you're going to see, it's going to feel like you're making no progress. But when you do, it really does take off and you see dramatic upside. So that's a book I think people should read.
Give me a daily habit that helps you stay focused on your goals.
Yeah, for me, it's getting up early. I mentioned that before, but I, like I said, most mornings I get up at 4:30. Nobody else is up there. My wife's an early riser too. She gets up at 5, but she goes and works out right away. So I've got a lot of time in the morning where I like to get into the Word and pray and hear from something, hear from God and center myself, and then be able to get a list together of another great book is The One Thing, but it's the idea of like, what's the most important things for me to get done today, and some of that's family related. Where spending time with the kids, but then as far as work and progressing business, what are the things that are actually going to move the needle? So get an idea of like what don't just get caught up in emails and caught up in all these little things I have to do. What do you actually need to do today that's going to move the business forward? And I do that in the morning.
All right. What's one thing you know now that you wish you knew when you were starting out?
I would say probably networking. I didn't network early on enough. I just thought, well, I'll do whatever I can do by myself and see how far I can get, and then network, and I don't need to network. I've just gained so much from networking. I mean, so many people say it, but they say it's because it's true. So I would have networked earlier. I think I could have made, even quicker progress. I've been very happy with, what we've been able to do, but I would have networked a lot earlier.
What are you curious about right now?
Well, I geek out on macroeconomics. So I follow all this stuff that's going on right now. So I did not expect the stock market to have a V-shaped recovery. The economy has in no way had a V-shaped recovery. So I'm really interested how that's going to play out. Then obviously you throw in an election year. Um, yeah, I'm just very interested how the next couple months are going to play out. I mean, we kind of papered over everything with, the Fed, giving a bunch of money to banks to try to get them to lend out like they did in '08. Then we, gave people a bunch of money, these $1,200 checks, $600 a week for the unemployed. So I feel like it really took away the pain for a while. I think it's coming. I mean, same thing with the eviction moratoriums, people not having to pay their mortgages for a while. I don't think that goes on forever. So once we start feeling the pain, I'm really interested what that's going to look like.
Yeah, I think we all are curious to see what happens and crossing our fingers as well.
Yeah.
On a lighter note, I know you're out in Lebanon, so I'll give you some flexibility with this question. You could pick a Cincinnati area or Dayton area or whatever, but give me your favorite place to grab a bite.
Well, I thought about this because I knew you were going to ask me this, and my wife and I are actually, I think they're still not open to eat in person, but we're getting takeout from a Mexican restaurant called Mazunte.
Okay.
It's there's one in Cincinnati. There's actually one in a Kroger closer to us, but the one in Cincinnati is an awesome little hole in the wall place. They've added on to it a little bit because it's such good food. I mean, this is authentic Mexican. It's really good stuff. So that's the best place to go, I think.
Awesome. You've given us a lot of great information today. I mean, I want to just play back a few things, but you talked about how you got started, really making that transition from being a therapist to trying to find more flexibility in your life. As you changed careers a little bit, you wanted to get into real estate, realized flipping didn't really solve that problem. Transition to multifamily, spent a year learning about multifamily and going through that process before pulling a trigger on that first deal, which ultimately led to two more deals right after that, and just continue to grow your portfolio now that you expand with Threefold, the podcast, and everything else. So lots of great tips and information. And in particular, I really like the fact that we're able to talk about investing strategies in smaller tertiary markets, especially if you're a little bit more in the offskirts and in more remote locations than where kind of the main MSA city is located. So great insights to navigate some of these smaller, more tertiary locations. For listeners who want to get in touch, learn a little bit more about you, or check out the podcast, what is the best way for them to get in touch?
Yeah, John, I appreciate that. I mean, definitely jump on our website, threefoldrei.com. You can reach out to us by email at info@threefoldrei.com. We've got a phone number you can call, 937-400-3044. Yeah, I love talking to people. So if you're interested in investing with us, certainly reach out. But if you're interested in investing and you would like me to be a mentor for 30 minutes, I've talked to plenty of people trying to help them. I love doing that. I love talking real estate. So yeah, I'd love for anybody to reach out that's interested.
Lee, thank you again for coming on Target Market Insights, the multifamily marketing show. We'll be in touch, man. I'll see you again soon. Take care.
Absolutely. Thanks, John.